Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Dan Bates, President and CEO of the Greater Hamilton Chamber of Commerce. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. It's going to be facilitated by Byron Skaggs. Wave to the crowd, Byron. Byron is an international, well-known advisor on business and the philosophies behind your business, and really an expert on being a change agent also for businesses. So we are thrilled to have Byron facilitating this conversation. And we're really excited today to have our guest, Dave Lippert from Hamilton Castor. Wave, Dave. Dave is fourth generation, right, Dave?
Fourth generation.
Fourth generation Hamilton Castor. They're working on their fifth generation right now. So very successful, long-time business here in Hamilton with an incredible reputation, and Dave has years of great expertise. So we are thrilled to have him join us today. So with that, I'm stepping out, and Byron, I turn the conversation over to you.
Great. Thanks, Dan, and I appreciate the opportunity to work and be a part of the conversation today. We will be discussing kind of the concepts from the book, The Infinite Game. And Simon Sinek wrote his book this last year, and that came out, and that's kind of what has pushed me to read into this. But he's not the creator of this idea, so this is something we're going to kind of dig into a little bit further and explore. Really excited to be able to have this conversation with Dave, and to be able to just hear from a historical perspective, and also looking forward beyond just the next few weeks or months, or even the next couple of years, but how a business can think for the long game, for the infinite game. And so that's what I want to be able to look into today. Dave, tell us a little bit about yourself. And actually, my first question is something just basically kind of, when you were a kid, tell us what you wanted to be when you grew up.
Well, that's an interesting little twist of events. Probably most people have stories of what they said they wanted to be and then what they ended up being. And most of us in the material handling industry, and that's hundreds of companies, and we meet every year several times, and we kind of joke, how many of us set out in life to work in material handling, and absolutely no one raises their hand, even in family. So yeah, I feel like we're all accidents of fortune or what misfortune to get where we are. A long time ago, I thought about being a Catholic priest, and then when things really got serious and got into high school, I went into the Air Force Academy and became a pilot, which could have been a career. Was an instructor pilot. Did that from 1977 to 1982. And at that point decided that the family business looked pretty good. And so I asked my dad, and he was more than willing and happy to see me join up. So in 1982, at the end of the year, I started my career at Hamilton Castor.
Wow. That's so from 1982 until now. Tell us a little bit of just in terms of the journey of your roles or within the company.
Yeah, Byron, my roles started, I think the title might have been project engineer or something. That's kind of, business speak for gopher, essentially. When I started, I was working on projects in our shop or in the manufacturing part of our business. I've pretty much been in the manufacturing realm my entire career. So it started with different projects, including putting an addition in 1984 on the north end of our property. And I say putting it on, my project was to kind of oversee it and then put the racks and all that stuff, kind of make it work. So it became a warehouse piece for us. And then I worked through supervision in various departments into plant manager, and eventually in 1994, when my dad retired, I became the president. 95, actually, I guess it was the end of 94.
Okay, that's great. And I mean, that's just I mean, a phenomenal journey for yourself. Tell us a little bit about Hamilton Castor and the history behind what you've been a part of.
Well, we're a family business, so if we go all the way back to 1907, my great-grandfather, John Weigel, so it was Weigel at the time, not Lippert, was the son of immigrants from Germany, and he was probably in our lineage the closest to a pure entrepreneur that we've ever seen. John was certainly that based on history, so I never met the man, but so I'm told that he was always trying to invent things, make things, and one of the things he played around with was casters. At the time, casters were a lot smaller than they are today, so we made casters that are almost the size of people in some cases. And his casters were much smaller, you could hold them in your hand. But he was into machining and using lathes and different pieces of equipment. He started a caster company that took root in 1907. He did lots of other things that never did take root, or the root withered, so it never lasted, but the casters did. And so John started this in 1907. It was in Hamilton. I think we had a shop on Hanover Street for a while. I think he rented property there. But in 1927, he bought property on Dixie Highway, and that's where this video is being made, at least my part is for. Because it was greenfield at the time. In fact, people would ask her dad, so why did you put a plant out in the middle of nowhere? And of course, you look at Hamilton today, and we're hardly considered in the middle of nowhere. But he had an idea that the railroad, which is to our west, would be important, and the Dixie Highway was a big deal. So he strategically bought the land. I think it was a little over 3 acres at the time, and put a building up. And at that time, believe it or not, in the city of Hamilton, Ohio, which is an amazing thing in the United States. And we're one of not too many more than that manufacturers in the whole. In 2020, of course, the world changed considerably. One of the things that changed in our industry was, instead of being little regional manufacturers, which is I'm sure was the case in 1907 and the early years, we became national and eventually international manufacturers. And so there's a lot fewer of us. And of those 6 or 7, of course, Hamilton Castor is the only one that's around today. So that's started the business. Like everyone else in the late 1920s, we talk in our lifetime about the Great Recession, and now we're going to talk about COVID-19 probably as some watershed moments in our lives. But in 1929, it was the Great Depression, and we read about it in our history books, so we studied it. That was a buzzsaw, just about took out everything, including Hamilton Castor. Her husband, so that was Ralph and Esther Lippert, and she decided, or they decided, which was way ahead of the curve in terms of women in business, because Esther Lippert was the president of Hamilton Castor, so when they bought the business, and she was president until 1943 when my grandfather stepped in. So the business was strapped in those latter 20s, early 30s, latter 30s and early 40s. My grandfather, who had a good job in a company in Cincinnati, he couldn't afford to leave to come work here for a few years. So that's how it came to pass that she became the president for a while. I'm sure he had an involvement in it. They had 4 sons. And so when Ralph started working in 1943, his boys were growing up. They lived in College Hill, and my dad would tell story after story of how he rode the trolley or whatever, some sort of transportation from College Hill and Peaslee Avenue up to Hamilton, and he loved just being at Hamilton. If anybody ever had a business in their DNA, it was probably my dad. He was here as a kid. He loved it. He loved everything about it. And then he went to college. He got a degree in mechanical engineering at the University of Cincinnati. They still have this program where he was kind of that work-study deal, a 5-year. So he was on different jobs. I know he worked in different machining jobs in Cincinnati. Lodge and Shipley, I think, was one. So he got a good bit of machining background for preparation here. Then there was a little bit of a stint called the U.S. Army, and he did that and spent his time. It was around Korea, the Korean War, but he was in New Jersey, and that's where I happened to be born, in New Jersey. Heard millions of stories about how poor they were, and I don't disbelieve them. Mom and Dad, that was. And he moved back after he got out of the Army and started at Hamilton Castor, and he worked his entire career until he retired at Hamilton Castor. So his entire work life, short of the couple of years in the Army, was Hamilton Castor. And my grandfather, who worked basically retired in 1976 and ended up passing away a few months later. He worked his whole adult life after that 1943-ish or so here. And one of his other sons, Tom, was in the Navy, and the way the story goes, I think it's true because Tom's still alive to attest to it. My grandfather said, Tom, why don't you start a little bit, spend a couple of years in Hamilton and see if you don't like it, and if you do, you can stay. If not, you can go on to something else. And I don't think Tom ever planned on working here, but he started and he never looked back. He retired, I think, in 1992. So spent his entire work career after the Navy here. And then I have another uncle who was a little younger than Tom. He did a lot of things. I mentioned being a Catholic priest. He was actually in the seminary for a while. Didn't stick, didn't become a priest, but spent some years there, sold books, taught high school, did all kinds of things, and ended up being our sales manager. So he was the last family member of the third generation to start. He actually retired first and lives out in the Tucson area, Arizona. So that was the third generation. They kind of, they picked it up and under their tutelage, it really became much more of a national organization, started selling through distributors. So people hear about Granger, McMaster-Carr. Really, before those guys were our customers, it was smaller, more regional distributors. But that's how we go to market, through distribution. That's how they started it. Couldn't tell you what happened before then, but that was what was going on in their careers. And then starting in the 80s, the fourth generation came on. I came first. I'm the oldest. And then my brother Steve joined a couple of years later. My brother Jim, Steve and Jimmy spent time in the Army. And then I have a cousin Mark who had a job out in California, and he's the youngest, and he started the last of the fourth. And then we've got a couple, I think as Dan mentioned in the prelude, that a couple in the fifth generation that started to work here for 2 or 3 years. So
wow.
That's probably more than you wanted to get, but there you go.
Well, but it's an incredible process to kind of even think through how, for so many business owners and for those of us that may be on this call and given the circumstances that we're in right now, we may be just literally thinking how we're going to survive this week or this month or the next 6 months. And I don't doubt that there were times when there were those kind of questions within your own family and with this business. But it is fascinating to hear a story of a business that has literally, progressed in such a way that it's well over 100 years and looking forward from there. And so that's part of what we're wanting to kind of explore today. And let me see. Oh, my little message just says that screen sharing has failed on my side. So let me try this again. I wanted to be able to slide up and.
I don't know about anybody else, but I'm looking at you.
Yeah, I wanted to be able to share a slide with you,
Okay.
and we'll begin to kind of just look at a couple things. But in the book, and part of what we're talking about is this idea of two different kinds of games. How there are the finite games and the infinite game. And there's a number of things that we can do in terms of making distinctions between the two. For the sake of brevity, a finite game is literally something that has a number of things, but there's a set of rules that everybody kind of adheres to. There are there's a starting point and an ending point to the game. When you think baseball, football, basketball, these are all things where at the end of the game you can identify a winner and you identify the loser, or you can identify a first place and a second place and a third place. The concept of an infinite game is different from that. And it's different in the sense that in an infinite game, the purpose of continuing to play. There really is no end point. It's unique in the sense that there are no boundaries. When we think of football, you run out of bounds, the game stops for a moment. And in games, whether it's a board game or whether it's a game on the field or on a court of play, the rules define the game. In the infinite game, the rules change during the course of play. And they're changed to really prevent anyone from winning the game, but it's also in the goal of bringing about as many people or persons as possible into the play. And so there are a couple of different distinctions that I want to make for how the infinite game plays and is different from a finite game. A finite game can be played within the infinite game. So you can have shorter finite games within the infinite game, but you cannot play an infinite game within a finite game. Finite players will play within the boundaries, where infinite players will play with the boundaries. Pushing the envelope sometimes is a phrase you may have heard at different times. And so then in the same sense, that these rules of finite games are like rules of debate, where in the infinite game, it's like language. So in a debate, even you want to be able to have somebody who's identified as the winner, who wins the debate. In the infinite game, the whole concept is about language. It's about perpetuating a conversation. And again, another piece here: finite players avoid the surprises and they try to plan around them, whereas infinite players expect to be surprised and they continue their play in pursuit of it. So the thinking here is that it's much more of a long-term process and a part of how we think about it. To be prepared against surprise is to be trained. To be prepared for surprise is to be educated. So what I want to explore a little bit, and Dave, I want to be able to talk with you, is some of these things of what does it take for us as leaders to begin to be educated to look for these things that then help carry and move us forward. So let's see, I want to shift a couple things here real quick. This will set the stage. So I'll kind of share this real quick. Leadership in business, it's an infinite game where the rules change frequently, where the competitors come and go, where there is no end point to the game. You're either ahead or behind. You're not really, there's no sense of final winning. You're either ahead or behind. So there's no ultimate winner or loser, but the game continues indefinitely until someone loses the will or the resources to keep playing. So to Dave's point with his example of, there were, would you say, 6 different manufacturers of casters in the area, in the region or this community, and now there may be 6 in the country. There's a sense that over time, different people either lost the will or lost the resources to continue playing in the game. And so the question, of course, when we talk resources, that's pretty simple. It's money, it's intellectual property, it's the people, it's the technology. Those are things that we can identify pretty easily, and you begin to target and look at how do you extend those resources out. What I want to talk about today, and this is why I feel like I'm kind of rushing, but I want to get to this thing, is what about the will to keep playing? What are the things that we need to talk about? And this is what Simon actually references in his book. The will to keep playing, there are 5 must-have components of will. And this is what I want to be able to kind of dig into a little bit more. The 5 components. 1 is a just cause. The second one is courageous leadership. The third is a vulnerable or a trusting team. The fourth is to have a worthy adversary or a rival. And the fifth is to have an open playbook. So when we talk about a just cause, we're really looking at what is that passion, that hunger that compels you. It powers you to outlast your competitors. It pushes you, propels you forward. It empowers you to persevere when you feel like giving up. Dave, talk to us a little bit about, and I know you and I talked, and you were kind of wondering if Hamilton would fit this notion of having a just cause. But I think another way to talk about a just cause is to look at it as your vision statement. And vision statements change over time. That's one of the interesting things is, I believe, that they change because the rules of the game change in an infinite process. The vision statement, because it's always looking forward, that will change and adjust because the future changes, right? So talk to us a little bit about the vision that Hamilton Castor has, not only maybe what you've experienced in the past to where you are now, but how are you projecting that forward to something that is motivating the company to continue moving forward?
Well, I'm probably gonna go off the rails here, Byron. We have a vision statement. We work through basically strategic planning. We've been doing this for, I think, over 10 or 12 years now, formally. And so one of the processes we went through was to work on a vision statement. And you're right, it's morphed a little bit over time. And our vision is to be the manufacturer of choice for heavy-duty industrial casters, carts, and custom-engineered mobility systems, which is the kind of thing that if you went around and polled 92 other people at this company, no one would get that right, and they might not even get it close. And then you would say, well, how relevant is it? And, well, it drives things we're doing, projects, how we're steering the business. But I guess I would come back and say that our just cause, that's in it, but the just cause is probably more about who we become. I'm going to say as a company with a culture that we're really, so I'm going to tie it into culture. I'm going to say that
okay.
What really works for us is the theme of culture. And that's the one piece that I'm really working the hardest on in a succession plan. So we've been working at this for almost 2.5 years, the idea that, all right, I'm out of here in the end of 2022, retirement, hopefully not checking out of the planet. So out of the business day to day, how do we transfer to keep all the good stuff and ideally get even better? And the focus is more around culture than any other single thing. And it's the culture that I'm convinced gives people that hunger to come to work. So it isn't just about the leadership, but it's about the whole 90-some of us that come to work. And there's just all kinds of cool stories that I can share. I don't know if you want me to get into any or not, but tell me that we have a culture that really is strong. We're not there yet. I'm not going to tell you that we've mastered it or that we can rest, but I think I know we've come a long way since I started in 1982, and it's not because of me. I don't want to say that, but things have changed, and I would argue the lean journey that we started in 1995 is the single biggest thing that's driven us to this point of at least recognizing the value of culture. and I would say how that fits in to really drive the company, the just cause, and to make the thing really run.
Yeah, I mean, it really is I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I don't think you're running off the rails at all. The fact that you've got culture as such a core piece of what you're trying to drive forward, I do believe that actually does. I mean, it feeds into this just cause. The whole point of a just cause is to push toward. It's not that you're saying you're going to have an end point, but it's this idea of progress and moving forward and having momentum to push yourself forward. And it's this vision to be able to create something that's bigger than yourself. And
but one of the tenets of a lean journey, and we're trying to pattern after the Toyota production system, Toyota being probably the preeminent model for a lean journey on the face of planet Earth, is that it never ends.
Right.
So although I'm not sure the Toyota guys would say, oh, we got this from Simon Sinek, or, they probably had it figured out before he was, doing this stuff. Nonetheless, it does tie together that Toyota would say, we're on a lean journey. And by the way, you never get there. You've never arrived. And as far along their journey as they are today, they would be the first ones to say, we're not there yet. And so I can very comfortably say that Hamilton Castor is not there yet either, but we're on the journey. And so I understand that a lean journey, and we've said it here a lot, so people would say that. They would know we're on a lean journey, and they would know that it doesn't ever end. We're never there.
Well, and that's, I mean, so to some degree, you may have a vision statement that maybe, I wonder if this concept, when you even talk about lean journey, that may actually speak more to your vision statement and a just cause, in the sense that, I mean, looking at here at the bottom of the screen here, says, you test it by asking some of these kind of questions. Is it resilient? Is it inclusive? Is it service oriented? And I think when you begin to unpack what a lean journey looks like, I think you could probably, it seems to answer those kind of questions with resounding yeses.
Well, it can. I mean, first of all, every lean journey is different. So no one should ever be confused by saying I'm on a lean journey. Oh, I know exactly what you're doing. No, you don't. You just know they're on a lean journey, and it requires a lot more investigation. I'm convinced ours is different than Toyota's. It's different from everybody else that's on one.
Sure.
I think that the service oriented, the third bullet there, it's interesting. I think you could be on a lean journey and maybe not be service oriented. I'm not sure. It depends where you see the service. So I think we look at service, I know I do at Hamilton Castor, as a community of Hamilton and also a community of Hamilton Castor people. The part of it is serving each other,
right,
with felt needs and whatever is needed here. And then the broader piece is service to the community. And we're a 93 person entity. We're a fairly small business, so we don't try to boil the ocean, as some have said. But we do try to make a dent in things in and around Hamilton. So we try to limit our service, community involvement things to Hamilton, because that's where we are and that's where we plan to be. So we do focus a lot on that. Now, if you polled the audience, polled our people, most of them are not directly involved in stuff in Hamilton, but a few of us are pretty involved. And so as a company, I think we're known for it. We could do a lot better job of probably spreading that out over more people.
Well, and I think the idea of it being resilient and inclusive and the service oriented, that's even as you look inward to be able to have those things and how you take care of your employees, how you work through those kind of processes, then that by nature I think begins to then spread out into the community. So to be service oriented, I think, is very much in alignment with what you're kind of talking about. Even that lean process is a part by which you're still helping people to kind of think through how to take care of the things in their moment, how to improve their own point, where they look back 6 months and say, okay, we're better than we were 6 months ago, and we're not as good as we're going to be in 6 months to come. And so it's that process of continual improvement, which I believe also then is, key to the concept of serving each other as well. So let's look at the courageous leadership piece, because I think we're going to move into this as we even get into the culture piece with people. But the courageous leadership, those are the places or the people who will prioritize a just cause above anything else, and then stay true to that cause. And then leaders within the company band together and act in alignment. So there's a sense that it's not like you have a bunch of different leaders who are all kind of heading different directions, but there is a sense of alignment and everybody's moving in the same direction. Talk to us a little bit about your leadership team, or how the things work within the construct of Hamilton Castor. I mean, you mentioned already that, you know, it's not me, it's all of us together. So talk to us about how you've brought your leadership team, especially in this, you said 12 years of looking at this strategic planning and the process moving forward. That involves a lot of different people. I'd love to just hear some of those processes for you and what that looks like.
Well, we've got a leadership team. We would probably, I think everybody would agree, there's 8 people on our leadership team. So 93 people, 8 are, 4 of them happen to be Lippert. So that's the 4th generation here. So we've got the head of marketing, we got the head of sales, we got the basically the head of finance. We have our CFO who works with my brother Steve in the finance, the guy that runs our plant, so call him plant manager, our lean manager, so the guy that oversees the whole lean movement here at Hamilton Castor, and then the guy that's heading our quality. So those are the 8 people. We are working diligently on all sorts of, so besides the annual strategic planning, which we all go through together, there's also training to develop leadership that's going on. So I suppose you would make a good argument that that's part of the infinite game, is thinking, all right, we need to keep working on professional development. Now that's a theme all over the place, so that probably isn't unique to the infinite game, but we're looking towards a transition in leadership to a new president and a new executive vice president. So my brother Steve and I are retiring essentially at the same time in about 2.5 years. So we've both been here a long time. And so this will be a significant change, even though there will be 6 that are remaining on, and some will, I'm sure, backfill into some things. So we're working on how to do this, how it will be best for the whole organization. So not just the leadership, but how the leadership can be best serving the rest. I love the model of leadership that has the upside down pyramid. It's my favorite model of leadership, because what it tells me, and what it's me telling myself, is that I'm here to help everybody else do their jobs. So in a sense, although you'd say, oh, who's the head of Hamilton Castor? And you might point to me, but I feel like my job as the head is to make sure everybody else has the resources, which include physical resources, training, all the things they do, they need to do their job well. And if I do that well, they're doing their jobs well, and we're serving our customers well. So that's maybe, again, straying off what you were driving at, but I think that's the way we approach leadership, the leadership team, and how we're trying to work in this infinite game. Sure.
No, and I think it makes a lot of sense. But when I'm hearing you talk, I'm like, boy, I don't think we're straying at all. So I am going to ask, because I know that we've got a number of people online here, as well as this is being streamed live to Facebook. Laura and Tiffany are kind of monitoring. Do we have any questions or comments that you guys want to interject for us? Okay. If you do have a question or a comment, would love for you to just to throw it in the chat area, and I'll kind of keep an eye on Laura and Tiffany, and if they wave at me, then we'll try to throw that in. So let's look at what it means to have this vulnerable and a trusting team, and this is where the culture piece comes into play. And there's a significant amount of time and investment with energy to build the culture where people are safe to be themselves. where they can admit what they don't know, where they can admit their mistakes. And then also the opportunity to take appropriate risks without retribution or retaliation, or a fear of the retribution or retaliation. So I'm just curious, as you're talking about culture, Dave, this is, I mean, fascinating stuff. And I love culture, so we could sit and park here and talk for hours. But talk to me about, and us, a little bit about how have you gone about this process of creating an environment in which people can work within the culture that you've developed and really work to their natural best?
Well, on the theme of trust, I would have to say to me, the number one book, and maybe Simon was thinking about this when he talks about trusting and vulnerability-based trust in his book, but it goes back to Patrick Lencioni. Now, I'll give him the credit. Maybe he would credit somebody in front of him. I don't know. But his book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, works on this whole theme of teamwork and leadership, and says the absolute underlying foundation of any team is vulnerability-based trust. And if you ever watch a video, and I really like the videos of Patrick, he's quite the entertainer, actually, more than I like his books, but he spends most of his time in his videos, at least, talking about vulnerability-based trust. And it's a massive theme. I wouldn't be able to tell you we've done a whole lot of work to arrive at vulnerability-based trust. I would say that to the degree that we have achieved it, it's probably more the result of we've been around each other a long time as a leadership team, and we are pretty adaptive at working with each other. One of the things we are working on over the next 2.5 years is trying to actually improve and come up with some measurements for that vulnerability-based trust. So one of the things we will be going through as a leadership team is the whole 5 dysfunctions theme and model that Patrick Lencioni has out there. So this is part of that professional development that we're working on to up our game, to make sure the transition is as likely to succeed as it can, so it's as minimally disruptive to the organization as it's bound to be.
So when you're talking about the idea of kind of creating metrics or finding some ways, have you processed that in terms of what are some things that you could measure that begin to show that
I couldn't share much about the trust piece yet, but I could tell you that we're working, and my lead manager has developed a couple of metrics so far in culture. To me, that's the piece. In fact, you know, what my role when I leave here in the end of 2022, I'll still be a director on the board. And I've told Lee, the lead manager's name is Lee. I said, Lee, one of the things that I'll be very interested in as a board member when I'm not here day to day is what's the culture like? You know, most boards would probably say, okay, show me the money, show me the financials. And yeah, that's important. But in a lot of ways, that's kind of the outcome of the culture. And to the degree the culture is successful, I think it'll drive the financials, not solely, but in large measure. And so I've said, Lee, I want to have some good culture metrics developed by the end of 2022 so that we as directors can see how are we doing on culture? How's Hamilton doing on culture? And does it need some work, some tweaking or not? And not that the directors are going to do it, but directors are there to guide the company from, you know, that 30,000 foot, the really
right
way view. And to me, it's become apparent, at least in the last several years, that culture is as important a piece as anything else that I'll be responsible for as a director. So I want to get this thing right. I don't want to go on hearsay. I want to go on some sort of metrics. And so they're not easy, but they're possible.
Yeah. Well, and it's really, I think what it kind of speaks to is it's not so much what leaders or the company does or what leaders do, which oftentimes we look at the metrics of, say, the financial reportings or those kind of pieces as that piece, but it really comes back to it's almost like who and how they impact the people within the organization. Rather than what they do, it's a focus on the leaders and who and how they impact. That becomes part of the metric process of it's asking a different set of questions, really.
One of the things that Simon said, and I'm pretty sure it came out of one of the earlier chapters, is leaders create an environment where workers can do their best. Mm-hmm. Something to that effect.
Yeah.
And I think he says that actually their natural best.
Right, their natural best.
So that's giving people the training, that's giving them tools, all the resources they need. So the time, the materials, processes, all that stuff so that they can succeed. And when you have a whole group of people working together to do that, that's when you have a successful team.
Yeah. Well, and it's great because at that point, there's a realization that I don't have to have everybody on my team that's just like me. It's recognizing, let me help you understand more of who you are, and then how we can empower you to be your best, your natural best, in the context of what we're trying to get done within the organization. Thank you. It's great stuff. Talk to us a little bit about your worthy adversaries or rival, and what kind of experiences have you had in this sense, that where you've had an adversary or a rival that has really pushed you as a company?
Well, I think naturally we go to our competitors, and so we're part of a trade association. I mentioned material handling before, and there is this MHI, which is a huge 800 plus member organization, centered in the US, but embraces material handling. There's a small group of caster manufacturers that has, I think we're at 6 members right now. So I mentioned that we have a small number of companies that still manufacture our product in the United States. What's interesting is that if I go back to my dad's time, so in the 1970s and probably back into the 60s, there was a trade association of just caster companies. Actually, it was caster and what we call industrial floor trucks, so carts and dollies. And there were like 40 to 50 member companies back then. Now, most of them don't exist today. They've either gone out of business or merged with other companies. A lot of them merged. And we've seen that a lot in the entire material handling business, not just casters. So our adversaries have gone from probably companies that looked like us back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, smaller family businesses run for generations. I know my mom and dad exchanged Christmas cards and knew each other's families through the trade association for decades. I mean, I knew some of them. It was uncanny. Yeah. Now it's a whole different world. I'm the old guy that's been around forever in our group in NHI, and the faces and the names keep changing. They circulate through from other companies. It's the nature of work, the nature of careers, the nature of companies has changed. And so the adversaries have gone from companies that look like us to overseas. So China has driven a whole lot of what Hamilton Caster is today, not in our culture, but in our product line. What we make, how we make it, what we do, how we go to market. All that stuff has been driven largely by China, and I'll call it the flood of cheap imports or inexpensive imports, not just in the last, back into the 80s, 90s, sure. And that still goes on today. I mean, one of our big competitors is a huge importer that has acres of stock down in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex area. And so we're competing against that. So we make, and I mentioned, we make bigger and heavier casters than my great-grandfather did. Part of the reason is our adversaries that have moved us to do that, make bigger things, make more customized things that the Chinese aren't as apt to do. The Chinese are more apt to do high volume, less expensive, in our world, lighter duty things. But I would also say that our adversaries have driven us, in a sense, into this lean journey. So they have pushed us. How do we get better? How do we not just survive, but thrive in the 2000s, now the 2020s? Well, one way we're going to do it is we're going to do it together on a lean journey where we can all improve together as a company, and we will win on ways that they seemingly can't. Yeah. And one of those ways, if you're familiar with lean at all, is the notion is don't stock everything. My dad used to say, you can't sell out of an empty wagon. And that's still true today, but in his day, that meant have a lot of stock of everything so that when a customer ordered something, you had it. Yeah. And now the notion on the lean journey is have the stuff that we need to make things, and when a customer orders, we can make it. And we don't have to have it all in stock. And that's where I mentioned a competitor with offshoring sources has acres of warehouse. We don't have acres of warehouse. In fact, we have a lot less space than that competitor, but we can make things as we need them, and we don't have to stock too many. So that's a theme of how do we adjust for the adversaries or the rivals in our world.
Sure. Well, and this is a great kind of it's a subtle distinction, but I think it's an important distinction where the important thing that actually pushes our will to keep moving is the fact that we are competing against ourselves. We are literally trying to find ways to improve ourselves and constantly striving to become a better version of who we are, rather than kind of the notion that sometimes is more in the finite sense of working hard to win at this game, and in a sense that includes potentially sabotaging colleagues if you're working in the same business, or sabotaging another business. I mean, it's some of those kind of things. Whereas this idea of having a worthy adversary is that somebody who, if you're running in a race, you're going to have a better time if you've got somebody who's running with you, or pushing you to get to the finish line sooner. And that process of a race, we see that when you bring people alongside, they may be adversaries, but in a sense, especially if you're thinking like cross country or one of those kind of pieces, they're still competing against themselves for their own personal record, trying to get to their personal best, and to improve themselves rather than just running against the adversaries. So that's, I mean, it's an interesting and subtle distinction. The last thing that he talks about with the will is the open playbook, and it's this idea that how we approach business is something that really can be very, very important when it comes to this idea of being flexible. And it's whether we have a variable cause with a fixed strategy, or do we have a fixed cause with a variable strategy. And that's, there's kind of the distinction between the two. If we have a fixed strategy, we're likely to have more of the finite look, and then we will kind of flex our cause to get us to that endpoint of the goal. But if we have a fixed cause, that fixed vision, that fixed just cause for what the future is going to, where we want to go in that process, then our strategies may adjust to get there. And I'm just wondering, Dave, if you can you speak to this from your experience with Hamilton Castor? What kind of things have you noticed in terms of how strategies have changed to help keep you on course with where the company wants to be in 20, 50, 100 years?
Well, I think, Byron, that if I just look back in the last 10 to 15 years when we've started this strategic planning, and that was kind of a byproduct or an outcome of the lean journey itself, that we have a more inclusive look to the future than we ever did. So this isn't something that depends on one person or even just a leadership team of 8 people, but it intentionally reaches out, it being our overall planning, where we're headed, what we want to do, how are we going to get better, how are we going to survive and thrive, what are we going to look like in 5 and 10 years or even 2 to 3 years. And so we try to engage everybody in our entire company, not in the planning of it, but in the fulfillment of it. And so how do we go through and actually do or complete all of our plans? And going back into the planning, it's not just fulfilling them, but actually honing them. So it's not just there's the finish line, now charge at it. It's helping to define what is the finish line, where is it, what does it look like, and so we use the term catch ball around here, but I'm sure there's lots of different phrases that say, you know, it's about engaging everybody. So it's our collective finish line, not mine or the leadership teams. It's all of Hamilton Caster's. I'm saying finish line and making it sound like finite, but that's a year's plan. And so,
Sure.
in a sense, that's like saying, okay, we finished this lap, now we're going to the next lap.
Mm-hmm.
So that sense of planning never ends. We're not saying, okay, for the final time, we're going to do strategic planning in 2020.
Right.
No, it's just another iteration of what are we doing, how are we looking at our future, and how are we going to get there?
Yeah. And that's, I mean, you're right. It's almost an example of a finite game within the infinite game. And that's certainly possible to have that. And so that's a great way to express that. There we go. We are close to having to wrap up, and I wanted to just kind of a few different concluding thoughts here. The idea that leaders are not responsible for results, but they're responsible for the people that are responsible for the results. And Dave, you spoke very well to this point of how it's not just you, it's their team, but it's not even just your team. It's the idea that everybody kind of buys into this, and it becomes the team of 93. And you know, the push for a just cause is something that a company or an organization is for. It's not something that they're against. So that's to think about is, you know, what is it that you and your organization, and I'm kind of throwing this out to everybody, just as you're wrapping up, as we're wrapping up, what is it that you're for? It's not that we're against something, but what is it that you're for? An infinite mindset is about staying in the game, being flexible to change in pursuit of the just cause, and having the courage to do so. And I have to say that during this time in particular, as we're experiencing this interesting pandemic, we're all on a screen because many of us can't or don't have, you know, work, or there's changes that have obviously happened. This infinite mindset is about staying in the game. It's about being flexible and trying to figure out how best to move forward. And honestly, I've been amazed at the creativity of so many businesses who found incredible ways to stay active, to stay working. Don't put your head in the sand. Find ways to continue to be flexible. And here's part of it too. So we don't get to pick the game, but we do get to pick how we play. The goal is not to beat your competition, but the goal is to outlast them. So I'm just curious, what does it mean to play the infinite game for you? For those of you that have been a part of the conversation here today, I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts on what does it mean to play this infinite game for you. As we do with each of the times we're wrapping up, would love for you to just take a minute and write down one or two insights, light bulb moments that actually came from our conversation today. This has been, feel like we always just feel like we're scratching the surface. That's the reality. But one or two light bulb moments or insights. And is there an action step? Is there something that we've talked about today that you're going, yes, I need to do this next. This is the next thing that I need to do in the growth of my own process of moving toward an infinite game in my business or in my own career. And what is that one thing? Make it a specific action step that you can move forward with. Make sure that it's something that you can do soon. Don't delay it, but work on doing that soon. And then take this first step to move your company forward. I would love to hear, it's important that you tell somebody what that is. There's the accountability piece in telling somebody what your action step is. So if you've got somebody at work or a colleague or a friend, tell them what you're planning to do to improve your business and to move in this direction. I'd love to hear too, so feel free to email me. My email address is here on the screen. Send me an email. Tell me what your light bulb moments are, the insights that you picked up from today. what is of most value from the conversation that we've had today, and what is the action step that you plan on taking to move forward? I do want to just say thank you to the Chamber, to TV Hamilton, and also to the Benison. The Benison was helping to co-host this today. And if you're familiar with the Benison in Hamilton, it's been an event center, but it is now incorporating co-working. So when we move off of this whole notion of shelter in place, the Benison will be a great co-working location for those who are interested in not getting back into a normal office. So just want to throw those out there. Thank you to those organizations as well. Next conversation will be June 16th, and we're going to be discussing data bias. And I'm just going to read this quick. Imagine a world where your phone is too big for your hand, where the doctor prescribes a drug that is wrong for your body, where in a car accident you are 47% more likely to be seriously injured, where every week the countless hours of work that you do are not recognized or valued. These are the themes that are presented in a book called Invisible Women on Data Bias in Business. And that's what we're going to be discussing on June 16th. So would love to have you there. Are there any comments, conversations, questions that have popped up before we wrap up? Nothing? Okay. Dave, I just want to say thank you. These often feel just way too short. And I really appreciate your time and your willingness to come and share some of the history and things that you've learned about yourself and the culture and what you want to be able to do and taking the business forward. Really appreciate your time today.
Enjoyed it. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you on June 16th, if not before. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Take care.